Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Tony Detzi, who is going to speak about his families from Calabria and Marche. So, welcome, Tony. Thanks for being with us. My first question for you is why and when did you start researching your family?
My sister and I had always talked about going back to where my mother lived. And in 2015, we finally decided. My mother lived until she died in 2010. And she was an only child. And she had always talked about this small town in Calabria where she was from. And my sister has always said, "Hey, I'd like to go there." And I'm 8 years younger than my sister. And I was always the tour guide. I'm the one who's always willing to drive and whatnot. So I said, okay, let's plan a trip. We'll go down to Amalfi, and then we'll go down and drive all the way down to Calabria. And so we in 2015 we went. Our plan was to go in September. So probably around February of 2015, I started to make some calls. I called emailed. I didn't call. Emailed the town of Seminara to ask for information. I also emailed the church where she was born, where my mom was born, to get information from her. So I got an email back from the church. The church secretary said that, sure, come over and we would be happy to help you in any way we can. Our big mistake was we went over and neither one of us spoke English. And since it's a small town in Calabria, nobody spoke, or excuse me, no, none of us spoke Italian. And since it's a small town in Calabria, nobody spoke English. So our big one regret was we should find somebody to serve as an interpreter for us, that if we really wanted to get a lot of information. But the nice thing was we got the research, went to town, met up with the mayor of Seminara. It's a town of 2,500. Sat down with the mayor. The mayor brought in the town secretary, who had the big white gloves, opened up all the books. We saw my grandparents' birth certificates. We saw my mom's birth certificate. We saw her older brother, who died when he was just a toddler. Saw his birth and death certificate. I wasn't able to touch him because they said you can't touch him, but I was able to take pictures of all of it. So I have all those in a book. Then we went over to the church, and the church secretary remembered me emailing him. He took us on a tour of the church. Again, it's big basilica in this little hamlet of 2,500 people. We were able to see the baptismal font where she was baptized. He took us on a tour of the whole church. And then we went back to the town hall, and they took us to the street where they thought my parents, or excuse me, where my mother and her parents lived. Unfortunately, there was a huge earthquake in 1908, and it destroyed a lot of the records and a lot of the streets. But he pointed out where he thought my mom was living until she came over here. Went to the town square where my mother used to always tell us she remembers the town square where she used to play all the time. And we saw that the town square was only about a block from where she grew up, or she lived there until she was 7, until they emigrated over. So that's what we did on that trip. It was exciting. It was fun. Our only regret was we didn't understand Italian, and the Italians didn't understand English. So there was probably a lot that we weren't able to get. Then we went back again in 2018. My wife and I went on a trip to Sicily, and we took the ferry over from Messina into Calabria, and then we drove back up to Seminara, and we met with the new mayor. There happened to be a new mayor, and unfortunately, he knew even less English than the previous mayor. So we really struggled. However, the nice thing was we struggled. We struggled. My mother's maiden name was Filippini. Uh, he went through all the information that I had gotten from the trip before. I brought it back with me, and he wrote down an address, and he said, I think this is a relative of yours if you go visit. So my wife and I got in our car. We went over and she said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm just going to knock on the door and say, hey, I'm here. And we went there, and it was a woman that would have been my second cousin to my mom. And then her brother and I'm trying to think who the third guy was. I think it was a cousin of theirs. They lived there, and they probably were in their late 70s, early 80s, if not a little bit older. And they op- they opened the door. I had my phone translator, and I put up here. I put in who I was and why I was there, and it was like I was this long lost relative. She hugged me and said, "Come in." We went in, and she poured espresso. We had espresso with them. Uh, I kept trying to ask her questions, and unfortunately, and she would read them on my phone, and then she would bark back all these responses. And of course, everything was in Italian, so I didn't understand a thing she said. So that was a big regret that we didn't have an interpreter, because that would have been a very, very nice. They pleaded with us to have dinner with them, and we were on our way to go somewhere else, so we couldn't do that. But that was our two trips there. That was extremely rewarding, gratifying, and fun that we were able to do that. And then in 2017, we went over. My grandparents on my father's side. They came from the Adriatic side. They came from a small town, two small towns, Mondavio and Coronaldo, up above Ancona, Italy. And my wife and I went over there, and my sister and brother-in-law went over there in 2017. So we saw where my grandmother grew up, and we saw where my grandfather grew up, and then where they married, and where they lived before they immigrated over here, which they probably would have immigrated probably in 1912. So that was our three trips over there, which were extremely exciting. I think we've made six trips over to Italy, but those were the three times we went back to trace some ancestors.
Yeah, so that's really a neat story. We went to Italy the first time we were living in England, and we went. So it's almost 25 years now, and I didn't know at the time that we went to Rome and Naples. We just really stopped at the train station, and then we went to Sorrento. I didn't know at the time that my dad's family, at least my dad's mom, lived on one of the main drags in Naples, a half a mile from the railroad station. My two families come from vastly different ethnic or social status, I should say. Mom comes from farmers in Bari, and dad comes from his father's family. They were lawyers, and his mom was from two noble families. So we were supposed to be there in April. We had this whole tour set up. I found a person. She calls it Italy Rooting, and they do kind of like you said on the TV. And she had all kinds of things set up. She wouldn't even tell me all the stuff that was set up. But uh, my third great grandmother, uh, her home is now the town hall in Capricota, and we were going to go there, and like you said, they were going to have the mayor and all this kind of stuff. So that's we're hoping now to go in May. So fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, hopefully let's get all this stuff behind us, because that's our big plans next year, to go back to Italy, because it'll be our 50th wedding anniversary, and we're going to spend a couple weeks and travel Italy, some of the parts we haven't seen before.
Um, so now were both your parents born in Italy?
No, my on my father's side, my grandparents were married and emigrated to the States right before they had their five children. So my dad was born in 1914, so they probably came over in 1912, and then my father was the second oldest. So my uncle was probably born right after they got. She was pregnant when they came over, so they were all born over here. But all the way on the other side. He was from the Marche area. His My grandparents, and we went back there in 2017 because I wanted to see where they were from, and they also were from two little towns on the Adriatic side. My grandmother was from a town called Coronaldo, and my grandfather was from a small town called Mondavio, and I guess, they were only about 5 miles apart. But these are really, really beautiful towns, both medieval. Uh, Coronaldo has a wall around it, really nice. And there, after they got married, they moved to Coronaldo and lived in an apartment there. And my grandmother would always talk about the wishing well that was right outside their apartment. So we went there, and right on the main drag, there's steps going down, and this big water well is right there. And we assumed that meant her apartment, or their apartment, was right across from there. So we are able to see that as well. And the same thing, we did that one totally cold turkey. We went into Mondavio, and I went into the police department, told the person's name. Uh, my grandfather was Guillermo Dezi. Before they came over, they spelled it Dezzi. And then obviously when they came to Ellis Island, it changed right away to Detzi. And so we went there. I gave him some information and whatnot, and he was able to tell me exactly where his home was. So we went down, and the home was still there, pretty much in disrepair, but it was still there. So we were able to see that, and take a lot of pictures. But there, I don't know of any other relatives. We don't have any idea of any relatives that would still be over there. I know he had a brother. My grandfather. I had three grandfathers, and all of them died before I was born. My paternal grandfather. Uh, Died, and then my grandmother remarried, and he died before I was born, and my maternal grandfather died the year I was born. So I don't know. I don't have any recollection of grandfathers. My grandmother on my mother's side lived with us until she died, and that was the sad thing. I was 7 or 8 when she died, and obviously my grandmother never spoke a lick of English, and my parents always spoke Italian while she was living, but I never picked up any of it. My brother and sister, who were older than me, obviously they were able to pick up a lot, but I wasn't able to pick up any Italian. But it's great to go back and retrace all your roots. It's really an amazing thing, that you have that ability to trace roots.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with PhilItaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. Yeah, no, and that's interesting. My dad's family, uh, three of the children were born in Italy. My father and his the youngest aunt, who was a little bit older than him, they were born in America. Um, and on my mom's side, uh, everybody was born here except for my oldest aunt, who was about 2 when they came over on the boat, maybe even a little bit, maybe even younger. Um, and my uncle, who they left in Bari when they came. And I think the intent was that they were going to go back. They came over because my grandmother didn't want my uncle fighting in another war. He had fought in Libya, and she didn't want him fighting and going to war again in World War I. So my uncle stayed behind, and I've heard a couple of stories of why he didn't come. They didn't want to send him. My grandparents didn't have the money to go back. They had, by that time they had a bunch of more kids. Um, so when he wanted to come, he had become of age, and he had to go in the Italian army. He wound up meeting my aunt. They had a family, so he didn't come till he came to Canada about 1949, and then he didn't come to the States until like 53 or 54. And they lived, my cousins, all my cousins lived in the house that was my great grandparents. And it's still there. And they had a few of them had gone back and visited the house and everything. Um, and as far as I know, we don't have any other close relatives from there. Um, I know they have. I did maybe a couple of distant relatives. And then on my dad's side, specifically my grandmother, I found third and fourth cousins really weird through Facebook and matching. My grandmother's name is Piramalo, and everybody with that name comes from the one family. So now let me ask you: Have you done DNA?
I did. My wife did it, gave it to me for a birthday present a couple years ago. Just, I guess she didn't believe that I was all Italian, so she said we're going to make sure. So yeah, it came back, and it's amazing. There's a lot of mixture in there because Calabria has a lot of influence from all the different regions. So I have a little bit of. Uh, northern Northern Europe. I have a little bit of Africa. Um, the Middle East is in there, um, and what else? I think that's it. Just those things, but predominantly Italian. But there is a lot of background from years and centuries and centuries ago uh, that make it. I don't know on my father's side. I don't know what influence they would have on the Adriatic side, but I guess that would be that Eastern European area. But yeah, I did that, which was surprising to me. When you think, okay, I'm 100% Italian, you would think it would come back and your DNA would say you're 100% Italian, but nobody's 100%, I guess.
The one thing I don't like about it is I don't know, Ancestry's probably changed 4 or 5 times since I did it years ago. And they rerun their algorithms and it comes up different every time. Sometimes sometimes I it shows that I have the Spanish and a little bit of French, which I know from being able to go so far back. And then other times it disappears. But one thing, if you might want to try, and I think they still do it for free. If you go to Living DNA and send them your ancestry file, they give you your maternal line and your paternal line, which is pretty neat.
Oh, okay.
What I learned when I did that, my maternal line is almost 97% from the Caucasus, and they show you um, the migration paths, so it's really pretty neat. And then my paternal line came through like Albania and through Switzerland and places like that. So it's really pretty interesting. And then another site that's pretty cool too. They let you do it for free, but then you could, if you want more stuff, you have to pay for it. But My True Ancestry, and what they do is they match you up to archaeological digs from 5, 10,000 years ago. So you did your DNA. Other than finding out that you're mostly Italian with a few other things filtered in there, like most of us. Were there any ahas, or did you find any strange relatives along the line of people that you didn't know?
Our family is very small on my mom's side. He had a brother, and my grandmother was an only child, so that is a very small. Now there's a lot of Filipinos though, even in the states. So I'm sure there might be some relatives that I don't know about, but I wasn't able to go back. And my father's side, the Detzi name, that's uh, that's going to become extinct in another couple generations because we don't have. There aren't many uh, Detsy boys that have gotten remarried and had boys. So that name is gonna disappear in another generation or so, which is sad. But I haven't been able to find any other relatives. Like I said, the one was a distant relative that we found in Seminar, and that was it.
Yeah, and that's similar with my dad's family. You know, I had some fun when we went to Sorrento because uh, we were roaming around the town, and right in the main square there was the Circolo Sorrentino, the Sorrentino Club.
Yeah, yeah. We've been there. We've been there 3 times. Yeah, yeah.
It's like an early Sunday morning, early, maybe 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever it was, and there was nobody in the place, and I saw a waiter or maitre d, whatever he was, and he spoke a little bit of English, and not much, but I said to him, I said, Can I come in and take a picture?" And he said, "No, no, no, no picture." So I said, I don't want to, I just want to, take a picture and Sorrentino, I showed him my license, Sorrentino. And he said, "No picture." So I kept trying to press it. And then finally he like nodded his head over to the side, and there were the four guys sitting at the table with the fedoras and the cigars.
Oh, okay.
I think we all have the same feeling that when you go back there, you feel that connection.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and Italian uh, people are so happy when you come there. I don't know how they're going to be next year after with all this COVID, but they are just so cordial, and that's why we enjoy going. We've gone back 6 times to different places in Italy, and other than the big cities. Rome. It's like any other big city. They're a little bit more standoffish, but when you get into the countryside, they are such a nice people, and we just thoroughly enjoyed going back there every year. You were saying about your parents and grandparents coming over. My grandfather on my mother's side, he came over. He went back and forth from Italy. He would take a ship out of Naples, and he would go back and forth from Italy to the States. I think he did it 2 or 3 times before he finally called for my grandmother to come over. And my grandmother did not want to come over. My mom said she fought and fought. And he finally said, "You either come over or it's over." And then she finally came. But she never, shortly after, well, he died then would have been in 1949. Um, but she never liked being over here. My mom said that she was always a bitter person. She always wanted to stay back in Seminara. But my grandfather, again, that time of the year, the war was just about starting. I guess it did 1917, and he was trying to make a better life for his folks. And where I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania. There's a lot of slate quarries around, and then the Italians came over and they worked the quarries. So that's what he came over, did that, and he did. I didn't come from pedigree. My both of my families were. Working class people, and they came over just to make a better life for themselves.
Yeah, and that's I could never understand um, why my my grandmother and my grandfather, my father's parents came, because they were connected, and um, it took me a long time, and then finally I found that there was a Maria Piramalo that came to New York City in 1905. My grandmother came um, 1915, and I think my grandfather maybe came about 1914. Um, and then I I said, well, that's probably why she came. Her aunt lived here and for 10 years in New York City. And um, I was trying to piece it together, and I spoke to my older cousin, and he said, no, Nanny didn't have anybody in America. She didn't have family here. And I said, Paul, I said, I'm sure. I said, that it's, there's no Piramalos. There's one family. So he said, I don't think so. And then finally, I found the census record from 1905 or 1910, and it showed the address of where this Maria Piramalo lived on 14th Street in Manhattan. And I called him back and I said, Paul, this is where she lived in Manhattan. Here's the address. And he said, what was that address again? So I gave him the address and he said, that's where my mother fell out the fifth floor window. So I said, well, there you have it. I said, they wouldn't, same name, they wouldn't have lived in the same place, right? And so, and what happened was my aunt, she was my godmother, she fell out the window and the clotheslines broke her fall.
Oh, wow. And she survived?
Isn't that crazy? I don't know if she's 5 or 6 years old or something like that. And that's what happened. The clotheslines were, I guess, slowed her down enough.
I have to I have to start it up. I haven't. My wife's family, my wife, she can trace her line. She's not Italian. She can trace her line back to the 1700s in the States. That's how far back they can go. Her one cousin is big time into genealogy, and she's traced it back. I think before George Washington.
Yeah, that's my daughter. I've been able to trace her all the way back, and then all the way back to Europe. Actually, um, she she wanted to find her birth parents. My son, he's not interested, but she wanted to. And once we found that, her both her birth parents have been here. The families are here since the 1600s. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, that's how my wife's family is.
Now, do you know what a gateway ancestor?
No.
Well, a gateway ancestor is someone that's connected to nobility that came to the States. If she was able to find, there's a list of it. So if she could find a gateway ancestor, she'll be able to trace back to Europe.
Oh, wow.
There's a list. Just Google gateway ancestors. And if she finds somebody on that list, she'll be able to go back to all the way back. And it depends on what like people that came over the Mayflower, for example, they aren't gateway ancestors, but some of the ones that came into uh, Virginia and South Carolina, they do. So, like my daughter, for example, her family, I was able to trace them back through South Carolina, and she's a direct descendant of Daniel Boone.
Really?
Yeah, and Captain Morgan, the pirate.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Well, my wife's side, I guess Johnny Appleseed is a real person. Um, that's in her lineage, and supposedly somebody that went across the Delaware with Washington is a relative. The name escapes me. She knows all that, but somebody that rode across the Delaware with Washington is in her lineage as well. So they've been able to do a lot of tracing.
Yeah, well, there's a really really nice guy. I'll send you his email too, but he's on Facebook. His name is Ky White, and his family um, his family's been here since the 1700s too. They fought in the Revolution. They fought in the Civil War on the wrong side. Um, but he is a super genealogist. And again, if she finds a gateway ancestor, I would contact him because he does some really cool.
Okay, well, her cousin is big time into that, so maybe I'll get that information from you then, and we'll see how it goes.
One last question. Um, you were in Italy. You went to all of these towns. Was there I know they were small towns and everything, but was there anything that you found in these towns, whether it's your mother's family, your father's family, that kind of struck you as something that, wow, this is really cool. I never would have imagined that I come from this type of line or anything like that.
No, no. I mean, uh, nothing that was outstanding because again, they were working people, and there were no relatives that I could meet up with at all, other than that one family that we met. Um, No, I mean, what struck me is just the town, especially my mom's town. How, e- even though it's as poor as it was still extremely clean. Everything was swept up. I mean, people have pride. It's just that it just you can tell that the young people were moving out, and all that was left were the older people to carry on their life, and there wasn't much there. Um, but no, nothing that was overly surprising to us that kind of said, "Oh wow," I didn't have that "oh wow" moment other than to be able to walk back in time. That was the big thing.
Was your grandfather, did he do um, that quarry type work over there? Do you know?
He did when he first started, when he first came over, and then he did a lot of like different odd jobs. He was a bartender. Um, he worked in the quarry. He did carpentry work. Everything just to get by, and um, that was it. And he was a. My mom always said that he was a very strict man. She would have some tough times with him uh, growing up, but he just did a lot of odd jobs around. There was one time uh, my mother said, but she never could quantify it as 100% true. She would always say that one of the times he came over, he went to Argentina, and he went down there for a short period of time, and then came back, and the big thing we never could figure out. My mom never was definitive on how they settled in where they settled. Obviously, they came through LSI, and you would think that a vast majority would say, "Ah, we're going to stay in the city," but they came into Ellis Island and then moved to this small town again. So we assume that it was for the quarry work. Where I grew up, there's a town where I went to grade school and high school. Uh, the town was called Roseto, Pennsylvania, and that town was probably 98% Italian. My high school was probably 98% Italian as well. Um, but that's where the Italians kind of migrated. We didn't live there. We lived in a couple towns over, and it was predominantly English, German, and Welsh. And the Italians made up a small minority of that. Um, so why my mother's side migrated there is still a mystery to us, and it's even a bigger mystery why my father's parents settled there as well. They lived in two separate towns. My hometown was called Wind Gap, Pennsylvania, small town of 3,000. Um, and the next town over is 2 miles away, and it's called Penargil, and that's about 3,000 people as well. My father's family lived in Wind Gap. My mother's family lived in Penargil, and why they both settled there is still unknown to us. So maybe my some of my cousins know about my father's side, but my sister and I and my brother don't have any idea what caused them to come over and say, "Ah, we're going to move to Wind Gap, Pennsylvania." As far as we know, they had no other people over here prior to them coming, other than somebody that would have been in the neighborhood in Italy that said, "Hey, come over here. We can."
All right. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Okay, Bob. Thank you. Have a good day.